Hello my knights, your unhumble bard is back with a third story from the Raven and Bear collection. Be warned, this one is a little spooky and a bit sad, containing descriptions of grief and allusions to drowning. In addition, it also contains depictions of some gruesome Celtic practices. However, with those warnings out of the way, let's dive into this tale. Caer y Môn. When they crossed the bridge from Gwynedd to Duwch, a row of heads mounted on spikes greeted them. Most had long since rotted away, so only pale remnants of skull remained. Not all, though. Beyond these grim trophies, Ata noticed a small village of stone buildings, stacked against a hill. It was barely visible through the oak trees which towered over this island. Unlike other settlements they had visited in Gwynedd, she saw no guards or fence of barbed wire. In fact, by sight alone that town appeared abandoned, and only her sense of smell indicated otherwise. Beneath Duwch's dense canopy, it grew so dark Sir Corbyn momentarily melded with the gloom around them. However, those dusklit eyes quickly adapted until his features were rendered in a colourless haze. Trees loomed over them like prison bars on either side of a thin path. Overhead, their sunny sky was obfuscated behind a cage of densely tangled branches. After a dozen minutes, this child gently pulled Sir Corbyn's sleeve to ask why the townsfolk hid from them and put heads on spikes. Rather than answer her, he instead promised to explain once they reached Caer y Môn. Before she could object, his gaze turned back to that narrow road which they followed through miles of eerily silent forest. A shriek rang out from those trees to their right. It was so dark beneath this canopy, neither of them saw the creature responsible. Sir Corbyn ignored that noise and smiled faintly when tiny footsteps followed him. For several minutes they walked in silence until a second screech pierced their ears. He marched ahead, even though Ata halted, her bright gaze turned toward the dark as further cries of distress beckoned them. Those dusklit eyes narrowed in suspicion when one wail was answered by another further from their path. She frowned in recognition, then glanced towards Sir Corbyn, who continued to ignore them. This little girl tentatively approached that line of trees and sniffed the air, only to back away immediately. Ata hurried after her master as those short, sharp screams relented. "Why are they doing that?" She grabbed a hold of his sleeve. He halted, then turned slowly. "What do you mean?" "Why are they pretending to be foxes?" "Pretending to be foxes?" Sir Corbyn repeated back and knelt to meet that bright glower with a proud grin. Delighted laughter almost overwhelmed him as two shadows suddenly came to life behind her. Once these strangers were discernible from the gloom of Duwch, he called out, "You can't fool this one, lads. She has our approval." A choir echoed around them where unseen observers had been hidden. Ata's lips drew back in a snarl until Sir Corbyn removed a glove to brush her hair barehanded. Once their audience departed, he explained the druids tested each new arrival. Any who failed were delivered back to that bridge and warned never to return. She asked what would have happened if they had not approved of her. Sir Corbyn hesitated briefly, then admitted many prospective pages simply went home. Ata's gaze fell in a pensive expression. The old knight waited patiently, for he understood why this child paused to ponder that word. Home. Though a princess of Gwynedd, she had only been so for half a day before they departed. Eventually, his hand cupped her cheek in a tender display. When those dusklit eyes rose to meet his own, Sir Corbyn murmured, "If there's a future you wish for, find a way to build it. To worry is to suffer twice." The pair continued their journey through this dark forest. Most pages arrived at Caer y Môn in tears. Ata, by contrast, appeared calmer than normal. Outside of wire-wrapped settlements, her keen senses were an asset rather than a hindrance. Sir Corbyn realised why the title Bear Girl was so difficult to shake. Furthermore, he held some insight into those druids and their approval. They demanded nature's danger be respected. She had already surpassed this test. After a few minutes, Ata scampered alongside him, then reached toward his hand. A sharp, cold sensation cracked against Sir Corbyn's ribs. Familiar clay-brown eyes briefly looked up in place of that dusk-lit gaze. He flinched away from this child, who fell behind as those ghostly steps faltered. The old knight quickly forced a smile, then offered his hand to her. "Sorry, Princess Ata. I didn't mean to do that." Tiny fingers curled around Sir Corbyn's before their journey to Caer y Môn continued. Eventually, they found a banner planted beside that narrow road, decorated by a white raven on a red shield. Beyond it, the forest gradually thinned. Spears of sunlight shattered this canopy, broken where an occasional tree had been felled. Ata's footsteps scraped to a halt when she caught sight of an enormous fort through that sparser woodland. Walls of sea-blackened limestone loomed above oak, while a tower behind them climbed higher than the firs. Miles ahead, a gate taller than 3 men waited at their path's end. Sir Corbyn halted to admire it himself. He soon realised this girl was frozen by shock, and gave her hand a soft squeeze. She glanced up in surprise, then smiled brightly at him. After a short respite, they finally reached Caer y Môn, home to the Order of Branwen. A pair of knights guarded its entrance, their armour painted a familiar shade of black. Sir Corbyn approached and greeted them by name. Sir Brent stood broad enough for 3 men to fit between his shoulders, while Sir Morgwyn was so tall he easily rested a hand against that keystone above Caer y Môn's gate. All 3 embraced joyously before this old knight stepped aside to introduce Ata, whose luminous eyes studied them closely. The giant knelt and offered his hand. "Hello, little one. It's nice to meet you. I hope those druids didn't scare you too much." "No." Her bluntness caused him to snort. Sir Corbyn smugly added, "Not only did Princess Ata realise they were making fox sounds, she could tell it was people." "That's incredible," Sir Brent exclaimed as he glanced between them in awe. "How'd you manage that one?" "Foxes stink, but I couldn't smell any." The girl shrugged in response. To her, it was obvious. "Can I ask a question?" "If it's about my size." Sir Morgwyn grasped hold of a nearby tree's branches. They groaned in a haunted melody, strained by willowy fingers. His body rose, drawn upwards with immense effort before he continued. "I'm Caer. We live in the north part of Hloega, beyond Cambria, where the calamity is weakly felt." "I thought it made people sick." Ata frowned in confusion. Sir Brent nodded slightly. "Deep enough it will. Some places are like a beach, though. There's waves which come and go." "Most of my people live quickly." The giant paused in a mournful sigh, then elaborated. "Not all grow so large either. Some are born wounded. I am fortunate in many ways." "Thank you for teaching me, sirs." Ata bowed respectfully, a gesture imitated from her master. "But I wanted to ask, why are the druids allowed to test pages? It seems strange." That dusk-lit gaze darted to Sir Brent, who scoffed derisively at this question. He explained it had been part of their treaty as his nose wrinkled upward. Then the knight turned sharply and spat upon its mention. When Sir Morgwyn grunted in contention, Ata turned toward him with a curious expression. This giant argued their neighbour's test merely ensured any pages were appropriately cautious of a dangerous world. Sir Corbyn cleared his throat to interrupt them, then knelt beside her. Both knights fell silent, bickering stalled by a cold glare. Meanwhile, Ata listened to him describe this conflict with ravenous curiosity. The Druids sought restoration of ancient customs, lost millennia before that fabled empire faced its calamity. Doak was a sacred island, so trespassers often faced brutal punishments. He told her this order of knights had once been highly regarded by them, due to a shared devotion toward Cambria's high laws. However, over many centuries their quiet disagreements gradually bred hostility between these factions. The Grandmaster before last ended it. His gaze darted up toward that tower pensively. This lesson concluded when Sir Corbyn stood and sighed softly. She promised that any successor would need their approval, then took a druid child as her page. Did I hear Corbyn right? Sir Morgwyn addressed at her as he pivoted their conversation to avoid an outburst from Sir Brent. His companion's lips had long been thinned by a bitter scowl, though it faltered once the giant asked, You're a princess? Queen Yvonne adopted me, she admitted after a brief hesitation, then added softly, but I don't know her very well. Blimey! Sir Brent gasped. Your pages are never dull, eh? Ata blinked in confusion at that comment, then glanced up at her master for an explanation. Those bright eyes were met by a startled expression, which Sir Corbyn had never made before. His stern gaze widened in shock, and slowly turned toward this other knight. An elbow crashed into Sir Brent's ribs, less warning than a rebuke from Sir Morgwyn. A dusklit glower darted between them all inquisitively, as the princess waited for one to speak. Sir Corbyn broke that tense silence first. What? Because of... Never mind. This rotund man looked down in shame, then silently turned away to open their gate. Sir Morgwyn spoke up after a harsh sigh. He don't mean to be dim as a wickless candle, Corbyn. Just a damn fool is all. It's all right, Brent. Sir Corbyn's voice was taut, an instrument wound so tight its strings begged to snap. Is Sir Mervyn up on the tower? I want to introduce him to Princess Ata. The pair passed through that gate together, her hand held tightly by his own. She stared at him, eyes aglow with intrigue, yet no questions were spoken as they exited a short tunnel. Sir Corbyn waited for a moment, breath held. Meanwhile, Ata turned to wave as the entrance of Caer y Môn closed behind them. Then her gaze darted around this ancient fort excitedly. He relinquished a lengthy sigh as his shoulders drooped. Gradually, that tension throughout him slackened. Once it had, Sir Corbyn knelt to direct Ata's attention toward various buildings hidden within their bailey. There were barracks, classrooms, a blacksmith, dinner hall, and farm. This old knight told her about each in turn, then stood. She squeezed his hand tightly before they finally approached the grand spire in front of them. End of Part 1. Sir Corbyn led his page up a thin staircase which wrapped around the outside of that tower. Stone walls replaced a rusted guardrail as its steps curled west. When they passed through these tunnels, Ata paused at a slender aperture. She peeked through to glimpse an inky sea beyond and gasped in wonder. Sir Corbyn followed her gaze with a frown before he walked ahead. Eventually, this pair climbed a ladder which led to the tower's peak. An elderly man leant against a short rampart, dressed in bone white rather than their order's typical black. He gazed across a sun-drenched canopy beyond this fort through antique binoculars. Once they reached him, Sir Mervyn turned his sea-blue eyes toward them with a wry grin. Before any words were spoken, these men pulled one another into a warm embrace. Ata stood awkwardly to one side until Sir Corbyn scooped her up. From this vantage point, she immediately noticed a long scar which curled around the Grandmaster's throat, though it was mostly hidden behind a tremendous beard, long enough to hang around his belt despite a loose braid. He greeted Ata with a kindly smile, then brushed a liver-spotted hand across her hair in a familiar fashion. Sir Mervyn smirked. "You claimed the Nightbane's prize." "Please don't, Master." Sir Corbyn pinched his nose, then explained for Ata's benefit. "The Grand Master believes that he can predict the future based on the movements of birds." One bird left his flock, two returned. Those stark blue eyes darted toward this young girl. He reached into a pocket and handed her an envelope sealed in wax. She stared down at the letters scrawled across it without recognition, then thanked him quietly. Sir Mervyn explained, "Though I never expected a princess to join our order. Your mother sent that a week ago." "Pleased to meet you, Grandmaster." Ata's head dipped in a slight bow. This elderly man smiled tenderly when that dusk-lit gaze rose, followed by a question. "Is the Queen, Mother, well?" "She worries for you, but yes." He glanced at Sir Corbyn, a question hidden in his expression, which was answered by a curt nod. The white-clad knight continued, "Queen Yvonne has made us aware that you might require extra help. Can you read, Ata?" "No, but I enjoy learning," she admitted as tiny hands tightly gripped that cloak for comfort. "I ask lots of questions." "She's ravenous." Her master grinned affectionately. Sir Mervyn laughed loudly. "That's grand. Well, how about a tour then? I can introduce you to your teachers and our staff." Their first stop was a log cabin built within a cage of copper pipes. Inside, a spindly man addressed as Pry loomed over an older boy. Deft fingers painlessly stitched a bloody cut. So nimble, Ata barely followed his needle. She gagged as a cloth drenched in chemicals was rubbed across the squire's leg wound. Amidst this patient's curses, that lean medic scrutinised her sharply before he insisted they return with an appointment. Outside, Sir Mervyn apologised for Pry's lack of bedside manner. She shrugged unbothered. Each resident of Caer y Môn, besides the doctor, greeted them warmly. Though Jim and John diligently dragged their mattocks through dark soil, Jeff stepped away to chat. An elderly man named Craig offered Ata half a sandwich while he rested in front of a dim-flamed forge. A well-kempt cook called Keris immediately hugged her and cooed in adoration. Sir Corbyn praised his page's restraint, which she responded to with a low grumble, clearly fatigued. Sir Mervyn turned toward the barracks, their tour cut short to allow for rest. Largest besides that tower, it stood 3 floors tall. First was a communal bathhouse, which doubled as a laundry room. Above this were bedchambers dedicated to individual knights and squires. Over 100, though most appeared empty. Ata glanced at a pair of doors across from one another, then addressed Sir Corbyn with a dour frown. "Do I have to sleep in another room?" "No, lass, we'll get a double room." He affectionately ruffled her dirt-black hair. A moment later, however, the old man hissed in frustration and corrected himself. "Actually, it might take a day before our room is ready. Grandmaster?" "It's all been handled. Come along." Sir Mervyn had already reached that 3rd floor, his footfalls unnoticed by them. Ata excitedly chased him up another flight of stairs her own steps nearly as light. Eventually, Sir Corbyn followed after he spent a breath to appreciate their similarities. Young children peeked out from behind oak doors as they passed by, a few dozen at least. The Grand Master grinned when Ata waved at those brave enough to step into view. Meanwhile, that old knight who trailed behind them simply sighed in relief. She needed friends her own age. Sir Mervyn halted outside a locked room and offered a heavy key to this little girl. Ata waited for a nod of assent from Sir Corbyn, then opened it with a gasp. Their chambers were larger than those below or any they had slept in prior. Small lanterns hung from the ceiling, which left them out of reach for that short night. Thankfully, none needed to be lit, as ichor-tainted daylight still cascaded through a large window. Its glass was clearer than any seen by this pair on their journey from Castle Glyndŵr. He followed after the princess, who scampered toward another door left ajar. A cosier bedroom adjoined his own. Though smaller, Ata hopped up and down excitedly when she saw brightly hued animals painted along one wall. By comparison, that main chamber appeared dull. Sir Corbyn smiled at this sight, then explained other children decorated for newcomers to welcome them, a tradition each page took part in. Familiar blankets caught his eye. Their verdant fabric was embroidered with a meadow of pink flowers which the old knight recognised immediately. They had been given to Sir Corbyn when he arrived on this island decades ago. Those sombre recollections were interrupted as a gentle hand ruffled that grey-streaked hair. Sir Mervyn assured them meals would be delivered soon, then bid farewell and closed their door behind him. Sir Corbyn methodically unpacked his rucksack, careful to set those overworn clothes aside for the hamper. When one hand grasped a robe softer than any other he possessed, that old knight paused. It unfurled in a delicate curtain of gold-trimmed onyx, Queen Yvonne's gift to him. Sir Corbyn recalled her palm upon his chest with a rosy-cheeked simper, then scoffed at the notion. When a tiny hand reached toward that silken robe, he jumped in surprise. Ata had changed into a berry-red nightgown. Its hem gathered around this girl's heels, a few years oversized. She hummed softly, then leant against his hip. After Sir Corbyn set aside the Queen's gift, he scooped up that child in one arm, her head pressed against him for comfort. Once those dusk-lit eyes rose again, a voice fainter than snowfall murmured, "I know I can't live with her, but can we visit the Queen?" "Even knights visit home," he chuckled tenderly before his free arm wrapped around Ata in a gentle embrace. When the girl pulled away, this old man's brow wrinkled in worry until she showed him that letter from Queen Yvonne. I'll read it, lass." Sir Corbyn stepped toward a smaller room where another bed waited. Clothes cleaned on their journey filled a drawer beneath its mattress. Though surprised, he was pleased to find her dirty dresses in a basket used for laundry. Less than a week ago, she had thrown them in a bin by accident. Once Ata climbed into bed, the old knight ruffled that dirt-black hair tenderly, at which a grumble of protest rumbled in her throat. An old stool creaked beneath him as a crooked thumb pressed against wax. Before this envelope's seal cracked, a thought occurred to Sir Corbyn, who handed it back. Ata blinked in confusion until he gestured for her to open that letter. She ran a finger across its seam, while bright eyes studied a quartet of lines imprinted on this crimson wax. After a prolonged hesitation, the princess pinched until they both heard a snap. Ata stared at each page intensely, then passed them along to Sir Corbyn, who smiled warmly. He read at a steady pace, voice low as stern fingers raked his greyed beard in a pensive fashion. "Dearest Ata, it has been 2 days since your departure for Caer y Môn. The roads are dangerous, and Sir Sean reminds me Duick's druids treat outsiders with hostility. Though I am confident Sir Corbyn will keep you safe, my heart still aches from worry. Cambria is vast despite how quickly it can be traversed. We are many kingdoms for a reason, unique despite our similarities. Your adventures will command changes you can scarcely imagine, so I fear our meetings will always be between strangers. Perhaps it was foolish to have hoped otherwise. Ata, few who suffered such injustice have been braver or kinder in response. My greatest regret is that politics prevented me from giving you this home earlier. In truth, I envy Sir Corbyn, who was steadfast in his care for you. He is a wiser man than most, so listen closely and learn well from him. If my foolishness can be forgiven, then please know this is your home, title or not. Failing that, write to me with any concerns so I might offer what scant wisdom is present. Let these pages we share carry my spirit alongside you, my beloved daughter. I must add at their insistence, Sir Sean and his squire Garrett look forward to your return. My Grandmaster has offered to tell the story of his proving, upon which he found you. Meanwhile, that young man has volunteered himself as a sparring partner. I believe him earnest, and so gave approval, after Sir Corbyn has taught you the basics of swordsmanship, of course. We all hope to hear word of your adventures soon, and to see you at our gates. I have every confidence you will grow into a resplendent knight, Ata. They are lucky to have you. With love, Toisoges Yvonne Glyndwr. When Sir Corbyn finally looked up from this letter, he sighed. Dusklit eyes glistened with tears, then reddened as tiny fists rubbed them dry. She admitted Garrett had let her listen at the Queen's door on their first night in Castle Glyndwr. Unsurprised, his chest shook from an earnest chuckle before a calloused hand ruffled at his dirt-black hair. This old man cheerfully explained that false slumber never fooled him. She pouted until her letter was returned and placed beneath a pillow. Those slender fingertips traced each ink scratch in a pensive manner. Sir Corbyn immediately recognised Ata's melancholy, homesickness. Deja vu splashed across his back as cold memories broke the surface. This girl frowned in concern when he shivered, that earlier brattiness abandoned. Despite himself, firm hands tucked her into bed for a nap, before Sir Corbyn reaffirmed no knight was forbidden from their family. End of Part 2. When morning came, breakfast was delivered to their door at the Grand Master's request. A plate of toast to share beside two more laden with bacon, sausages, mushrooms, tomatoes and black pudding. While they ate, Princess Ata stared up at Sir Corbyn in an eerie fashion. Those dusklit eyes refused to blink, even through mouthfuls of food. She had a question for him. After this meal was eaten and their plates were bare, he dampened a cloth to clean her face with. When prompted to ask, Ata admitted that Queen Yvonne's letter had caused a dream. In it, all three of them played games together. Sir Corbyn paused momentarily, then suggested they visit the one building missed on their tour yesterday. When her head tilted in confusion, he smiled wryly without further explanation. Once both were dressed in comfortable attire, this old knight led Ata outside. Caer y Mon's school almost stretched from wall to wall, though its second floor was far shorter. At one end, a slender spire of pale stone housed an extensive library. Inside, rather than a corridor built down the middle, it ran alongside each room instead. They passed three before Sir Corbyn introduced Ata to Steve. Dressed in a deep blue robe, he hobbled forward on a cane of charred wood to greet them in a kindly fashion. Despite his obvious pain, this man knelt before the princess, then invited her to join their lesson. A few children peeked out from a doorway behind Steve, who looked back with a chuckle. She ignored him and glanced up at Sir Corbyn, brow wrinkled in confusion. His rough timber was enveloped by a familiar softness, as he explained while a hand ran across her dirt-black hair. You told me about that dream because you need to tell her. If you learn to write, You can send your mother a letter instead." "You're wrong!" Ata cried so furiously the old knight flinched. This red-faced girl fidgeted with her skirt's ruffles, then declared in an awkwardly pinched voice, "I wanted to tell both of you." A realization crashed over him, heavier than a storm-whipped wave. He stood dumbfounded while she shrank, disheartened by the silence. Before she scurried away, this old knight thankfully recalled his senses enough to answer her. "Alright then. Well, you could write something for me. I mean, I'd love it if you did." Though it was a simple request, Ata's face swelled joyfully. Embarrassment overwhelmed, with an enormous grin returned tenfold by him. After she had sprinted into Steve's classroom at a hurricane pace, he let that smile collapse. Sir Corbyn walked away as though water pooled around his ankles, each footfall clumsy and leaden despite their slow pace. This old knight meandered around the bailey, lost in feeling. Like every page, Ata needed more than a teacher. Her ardent declaration had proven that. Yet decades of guilt still weighed upon him despite his best efforts. Eventually, he stumbled back to their barracks in search of one who always held an answer. Sir Corbyn stood outside his former master's door, frozen by uncertainty. Before he managed to raise a hand and knock, it opened. The elderly Grand Master blinked in surprise, already dressed in pale waders held up by suspenders. A fishing rod rested across Sir Mervyn's shoulders, which was immediately set aside. Before Sir Corbyn had a chance to back away, a liver-spotted hand dragged him into this cosy office. "What troubles you, my boy?" that venerable man inquired after he made a great fuss over the night's lack of rest. Sir Corbyn hesitated, then asked, "Am I worthy of a page?" "Beyond worthy. Does your grief still deceive you?" That question drove a barbed knife behind his ribs. A mask of calloused hands covered those pebble-brown eyes as this man curled forward in a choked sigh. He mastered himself with a slow breath and admitted mournfully, "I immediately cared so deeply for this girl. I worry it clouded my judgment." "Remember well, a knight must heed." Sir Mervyn counted each upon a finger as they were named. "Fate, history, and duty." "I'd argue for our heart's inclusion." Sir Corbyn bristled when his former master chuckled. "Do you mock me, Grand Master?" "Never." He rested a liver-spotted hand atop that younger man's and patted it gently. "But I have another lesson for you. Love begets duty, yet devotion demands reward, else it is folly. So because I care," an unblemished palm turned to face the Grand Masters, who replied in kind, "it is my duty to raise her, and be rewarded by how she grows." Sir Mervyn ruffled his former squire's formerly russet hair tenderly, "as I have been." A grunt of discomfort escaped this elderly knight as he stood with a devious smirk. It was instantly recognised by Sir Corbyn, who sighed in resignation. A lesson delivered in cryptic requests, hid behind ocean blue eyes which softened dolefully. His master then invited him to help collect the crab cages just outside their fort. Though he grimaced in response, Sir Corbyn still followed Sir Mervyn toward that painfully familiar cove. These old men gingerly traversed a cold beach not far from Caer y Môn. Large boulders had crumbled into a rocky shoreline of fist-sized stones which were gradually smoothed into pebbles. Across tall waves of storm-blackened sea, they saw a grey line across the horizon. Northwest of Cambria was a land known as Ayr. Foamy brine splashed across Sir Corbyn's boots while he dragged in a cage. Eventually, his gaze turned towards Sir Mervyn, who had quietly perched upon a rock rather than help. This older knight inhaled deeply, arms raised high in a patient stretch. Several joints popped loudly enough to be heard above waves which rolled up the beach past Sir Corbyn. Slim shoulders drooped in a weary sigh. before a chain hooked onto one of their traps fell from that younger knight's grasp. He climbed up this boulder to sit beside his former master. This is another lesson. You hated it here. Sir Mervyn gestured at a thin stretch of stones adorned by seaweed. Deep blue eyes closed serenely, each breath guided by the ocean's push and pull. Sir Corbyn slowly turned an incredulous glare toward him as a singular reply came to mind. Yet you still made me bring in these cages more times than I can count. A knight must never ignore history. A cunning smirk gently tugged at this elderly man's lips, especially their own. I didn't ignore it. I almost died here. He pulled both knees under his chin, a fist clenched. Together they watched those inky swells which climbed high enough to obscure that shadow on their horizon. After an awkward silence, the younger knight admitted defeat with a sigh. I never understood this lesson. It was my only failure as your master. I could name a few others, Sir Corbyn chuckled dourly. Sir Mervyn scoffed in response. Corbyn, if you had not washed up here, you would have died, rather than might have. I know, I'm grateful that's the case. A low sigh ached within him until he confessed. It just reminds me of the shipwreck. While Ata reminds you of Lloyd, at last those briny eyes opened in a sympathetic gaze which crashed over that younger man. Icy tears ran down Sir Corbyn's cheeks unbidden, while a tender hand gently rubbed his back. You cling to the worst interpretation of what happens, but nothing you did was wrong. Minutes passed as sobs softened into breaths. Once this beach was silent, Sir Mervyn hopped down from that rock to retrieve a crab cage. After those muddy eyes were rubbed dry, Sir Corbyn lifted his head, frozen in surprise by the water's beauty. Waves of sapphire shattered into pearlescent foam under silvery clouds. Suddenly beautiful, and no different than moments earlier. Shortly after they climbed out of this cove, then marched through a small wood which stretched from shore to wall. Sir Mervyn crushed his former protégé in a hug, before he wandered over to their dining hall with a bucket of crabs. Meanwhile, those pebble-brown eyes darted skyward as a hand shielded them from the sun. Hours had passed since Ata was left in Steve's care. Before Sir Corbyn stepped toward that schoolhouse, his lungs drew in enough breath to choke his anxiety. Several adults waited outside. He stood amongst them and made idle conversation. Most were partners of knights, sent away on quests, who lived in Caer y Môn with their children. 2 more belonged to this order and had pages to collect. All greeted him fondly, as most might an elder relative they respected. Sir Corbyn, look what I did! Ata crashed into his knee as he turned toward her voice. She bounced excitedly, a scrap of paper held overhead. Rough charcoal had been scraped across it in more legible lettering than expected. Ata and Sir Corbyn. That's incredible, Princess. The knight blinked as warm tears gathered along his eyelids. You're a quick learner, lass. On their way back to Sir Corbyn's chambers, Ata told him about her lesson. To begin with, Steve had demonstrated how all 29 letters represented a sound. After they were copied down, the princess attempted to spell various words, mainly places or people from Gwynedd. Eventually, she admitted most of this alphabet was already forgotten. Her candour brought a slight smirk to that stern man's often guarded visage. Once they had returned to those adjoined rooms, the old knight immediately lay upon his bed with a grunt of relief. Meanwhile, Ata climbed onto a chair where she quietly muttered each letter in their names. When Sir Corbyn realised this child read from that slip of paper shown to him earlier, he called the girl closer. Once within reach, a paternally heavy hand ruffled her hair as an affectionate smile crossed his lips. A sore-ribbed whisper told Ata where paper and charcoal pencils could be found. This old man took them to quickly scribble each letter that note lacked. He called them out in a melody. Though not fair of voice, his song still caused the princess to nod along with its beat. Sir Corbyn repeated himself, then gestured for her to join in as they chanted a third time. Without further instruction, she knelt beside this old man's bed. Charcoal pencils scratched at paper in an improvised percussion under Ata's voice, which steadily grew more confident. Fatigue from weeks of travel and combat against an Avank had finally caught up to the knight. Before he passed out, Sir Corbyn murmured just loud enough that her work paused. "You really are such a good girl, Ata." The end. Thank you all for listening. I know that story was a little darker and sadder than normal, but I hope you all enjoyed it. If you did, please subscribe and like, comment on or share this with people. It means a lot and helps keep me motivated. If you didn't, feel free to tell me why. Either way, diolch am wrando.